Lisa Chen never thought a simple road trip would change her life forever. The 35-year-old teacher from Phoenix had been planning this solo journey for months. After her painful divorce was finalized, she needed time alone to think and heal. Her friends kept telling her it was dangerous to travel by herself, especially in the remote areas of Arizona. But Lisa was stubborn. She wanted to prove to herself that she could be independent. On a bright Thursday morning in June, Lisa packed her small red sedan with enough clothes for a week. She threw in some snacks, filled up 2 water bottles, and made sure her phone was fully charged. Her plan was simple: drive through some of the less traveled roads in Arizona, maybe stop at a few small towns and clear her head. She had printed out maps from the internet, but like most people, she relied on her phone's GPS to guide her. The first few hours of driving went perfectly. Lisa drove north from Phoenix, enjoying the desert scenery and the freedom of being on her own schedule. She stopped at a gas station in a small town called Wickenburg and filled up her tank. The elderly man at the counter looked at her with concern when she mentioned she was heading into the backcountry alone. "You sure about that, miss? Some of them roads out there don't get much traffic. Phone service gets spotty too," he warned her. Lisa smiled confidently. "I'll be fine. I have GPS and plenty of gas." The old man shrugged. "Well, you be careful now. Desert don't forgive mistakes." Lisa didn't pay much attention to his warning. She was used to city life where help was always nearby. She couldn't imagine how different things would be in the vast emptiness of the Arizona desert. As she drove further from town, the landscape became more beautiful, but also more isolated. Tall saguaro cactuses stood like sentinels against the bright blue sky. The mountains in the distance looked purple and mysterious. Lisa felt peaceful for the first time in months. This was exactly what she needed. Around noon, her GPS started acting strange. The little arrow that showed her location kept jumping around. Then the screen went blank. She pulled over and tried restarting her phone, but the GPS app couldn't find her location anymore. There were no cell phone towers out here, so she had no signal. Lisa wasn't too worried yet. She remembered seeing a main road on her printed map that should connect back to the highway. She decided to keep driving and look for signs. The dirt road she was on seemed to go in the right direction, but as the afternoon wore on, the road got rougher. What started as a decent gravel road turned into deep sand and rocks. Her small sedan wasn't built for this kind of terrain, but Lisa kept pushing forward. She was sure the main road was just ahead. The desert around her looked the same in every direction now. Rolling hills covered with cacti and desert shrubs stretched as far as she could see. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and Lisa started to feel the first hints of worry in her stomach. Then it happened. As she drove through what looked like a shallow sandy area, her car suddenly lurched and stopped. She pressed the gas pedal, but the wheels just spun, making a whining sound. She was stuck. Lisa got out of the car to see what was wrong. Her heart sank when she saw that her rear wheels had sunk deep into soft sand. She tried pushing the car, but it wouldn't budge. She looked around for something to put under the wheels for traction, but there was nothing useful nearby. The silence around her was complete and frightening. No cars, no planes overhead, no people. Just the sound of wind blowing through the desert plants and the distant call of a bird she couldn't see. Lisa tried her phone again, hoping for even one bar of signal. Nothing. She walked around her car, holding the phone up high, but the screen stubbornly showed no service. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in beautiful shades of orange and red, the temperature started to drop. Lisa had dressed for the warm day and only had a light sweater in her car. She also realized she was getting thirsty and hungry. She'd only brought 2 bottles of water and some granola bars, thinking she would stop at restaurants along the way. She sat in her car as darkness fell, trying not to panic. Surely someone would come looking for her soon. Her sister knew she was taking a road trip, though Lisa hadn't told her exactly where she was going. Her ex-husband certainly wouldn't miss her. The school where she worked thought she was on vacation for the next week. The desert night was surprisingly cold. Lisa had expected it to stay warm, but without the sun, the temperature dropped quickly. She wrapped herself in the car blanket she kept in the back seat and tried to sleep, but every small sound made her jump. She had never experienced such complete darkness and silence. When morning came, Lisa felt a bit better. In the daylight, her situation didn't seem as scary. She ate one of her granola bars and drank some water, being careful not to drink too much since she didn't know how long it would have to last. She decided to try walking back the way she had come to find the main road. But after walking for about an hour in the growing heat, everything looked the same. The desert played tricks on her eyes. Hills that seemed close were actually far away. Paths that looked like roads turned out to be just natural gaps between cacti. Lisa realized she was getting lost and decided to turn back to her car. But when she looked around, she couldn't see it anywhere. Panic set in as she climbed a small hill, desperately searching for the red color of her sedan. Finally, she spotted it about half a mile away. She had been walking in the wrong direction. By the time she got back to her car, she was exhausted and had used up more energy and water than she could afford. The sun was getting hot again, and she was starting to understand just how serious her situation was. Lisa looked at her 2 water bottles. One was already empty and the other was half full. She had 3 granola bars left. No one knew where she was. Her car was stuck, and she had no way to call for help. As she sat in the shade of her car, Lisa thought about the old man at the gas station. His words came back to her. Desert don't forgive mistakes. She was beginning to understand what he meant. Out here, far from civilization, a simple wrong turn could become a matter of life and death. The vast desert stretched endlessly around her, beautiful but merciless under the blazing sun. Lisa had wanted independence and solitude. Now she had more of both than she had ever bargained for. As the temperature climbed toward 100 degrees, she realized that her peaceful road trip had become a fight for survival. The second day in the desert hit Lisa like a sledgehammer. She woke up cramped and sore from sleeping in her car, her neck twisted at an awkward angle against the window. The sunrise was beautiful, painting the sky in soft pink and orange colors, but Lisa barely noticed. Her mouth felt like cotton, and her head was already starting to pound. She checked her water supply with growing dread. The half bottle she had left yesterday was now her lifeline. She took a small sip, letting it roll around her mouth before swallowing. The water was warm and tasted like plastic, but it was the most precious thing she had. The temperature was already climbing, and it wasn't even 7 a.m. yet. Lisa knew that desert days could reach dangerous levels of heat, but she had never experienced it firsthand. Living in Phoenix, she was used to air conditioning, cold drinks, and shade whenever she needed it. Out here, there was no escape from the sun's brutal power. She tried once more to free her car, digging around the wheels with her hands and a small shovel she found in her trunk. The metal shovel burned her hands after just a few minutes in the sun. She tried putting rocks and sticks under the wheels, but when she pressed the gas, the car just dug deeper into the sand. After an hour of struggling, Lisa was drenched in sweat and breathing hard. She had used up energy she couldn't afford to waste. The smart thing to do was conserve her strength and stay in whatever shade she could find. She opened her car doors and tried to create a cross breeze, but the air was still and hot. It felt like being inside an oven. By 10 a.m., the metal parts of her car were too hot to touch. The steering wheel burned her hands, and the seatbelt buckle was like a piece of fire. Lisa remembered reading somewhere that you should stay with your car if you got lost because it was easier for rescuers to spot than a person walking. But what if no one was looking for her? What if no one even knew she was missing? She tried not to think about that. Instead, she focused on making herself visible to any planes that might fly over. She used her car's mirrors to reflect sunlight, moving them back and forth to create flashing signals. She spread her bright red sweater on the roof of her car. She even used her lipstick to write "help" on her windshield. But hour after hour passed with no sign of aircraft. The sky was empty except for a few birds circling high overhead. Lisa wondered if they were vultures and tried to push that thought away. As the day got hotter, strange things started happening to her body. Her skin felt tight and dry. When she pinched the back of her hand, the skin stayed up for several seconds before going back down. She remembered from health class that this was a sign of dehydration. Her headache got worse, pounding behind her eyes like a drum. She felt dizzy when she stood up too quickly. Her mouth was so dry that her tongue started to stick to the roof of her mouth. She tried to make saliva by thinking about her favorite foods, but even that stopped working. Lisa rationed her water carefully, taking just tiny sips every hour. But she could see the level in the bottle dropping steadily. At this rate, she would be out of water by evening. The thought terrified her. She tried to remember everything she had ever heard about desert survival. Don't travel during the day, stay in shade. Don't waste energy. Don't drink your own urine. That was a myth that could actually make dehydration worse. Try to collect morning dew if possible. But when she checked her car in the early morning, there was no dew. The desert air was too dry. She thought about trying to get water from cacti, but she knew that most cacti didn't actually have drinkable water inside them. Some were even poisonous. Around noon, when the heat became unbearable, Lisa crawled under her car for shade. The ground was hot, but it was better than being in the direct sun. She lay there, trying not to move, trying not to think, trying to save every bit of energy and moisture in her body. The silence was overwhelming. In the city, there was always some noise. Traffic, air conditioners, people talking. Here, the quiet was so complete it made her ears ring. The only sounds were her own breathing and heartbeat, which seemed impossibly loud. She started talking to herself just to hear a human voice. "You're going to be okay, Lisa. Someone will find you. You just have to hang on a little longer." But as the hours passed, her voice became weaker and more hoarse. The heat played tricks on her eyes. She saw shimmering waves rising from the ground that made distant objects dance and waver. Sometimes she thought she saw water in the distance, but when she looked more carefully, it was just empty desert. As evening approached, Lisa finished her last water bottle. She tilted it back and got every drop, then sat staring at the empty plastic container. It felt like holding her own death sentence. The sunset was spectacular, but Lisa barely saw it. She was starting to understand that she might actually die out here. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt strangely calm. Maybe this was what people meant when they talked about accepting your fate. She thought about her life and realized how much time she had wasted being angry about her divorce, worried about small problems at work, stressed about things that didn't really matter. If she got out of this alive, she promised herself she would live differently. The desert night brought blessed relief from the heat, but also new problems. Without the sun, the temperature dropped quickly. Lisa's sweaty clothes became cold and clammy against her skin. She had no warm clothing except for the light sweater that was now spread on her car roof as a signal. She wrapped herself in her car's floor mats and seat covers, trying to stay warm. But she was shivering violently, and the cold seemed to go right through to her bones. Her body was running out of the energy it needed to keep her warm. Lisa dozed fitfully, waking up every few minutes from the cold or from dreams about water. She dreamed of cold glasses of ice water, swimming pools, and rain showers. Each time she woke up, the reality of her situation hit her like a punch to the stomach. By dawn of the third day, Lisa knew she was in serious trouble. She felt weak and confused. Her skin was dry and hot to the touch, but she wasn't sweating anymore, which she somehow knew was a bad sign. When she tried to stand up, the world spun around her, and she had to grab onto her car to keep from falling. She looked at herself in her car's mirror and was shocked by what she saw. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her eyes were sunken and surrounded by dark circles. Her skin looked gray and papery. She looked like she was already dying. But somewhere deep inside, a stubborn part of Lisa refused to give up. She had survived one day, then two. Maybe she could survive one more. Maybe help would come today. She had to believe that, because the alternative was too horrible to think about. As the sun rose on her third day in the desert, Lisa settled back into whatever shade she could find and prepared to fight for another day of life. Day 3 without water was when Lisa's body began to shut down. She woke up feeling like she was moving through thick mud. Every simple action, sitting up, opening her car door, even thinking clearly, required enormous effort. Her body was fighting a losing battle against the desert's relentless assault. The morning sun, which had once seemed beautiful, now felt like an enemy rising to torture her again. Lisa's skin was so dry it felt like paper that might crackle if she moved too quickly. Her lips had cracked so badly that tiny drops of blood dotted them like red paint on cracked leather. She tried to produce saliva by working her tongue around her mouth, but there was nothing there. Her mouth felt like it was filled with sand. When she tried to swallow, her throat muscles barely worked. The simple act of breathing had become difficult and painful. Lisa's headache had evolved into something beyond pain. It felt like someone was hitting her skull with a hammer from the inside. The pounding was so intense that she couldn't think straight. She would start a thought and then forget what she was thinking about halfway through. Around mid-morning, something scary happened. Lisa tried to stand up to change position, but her legs wouldn't hold her weight. She collapsed back onto the ground, her vision going black for a few seconds. When her sight cleared, She realized she was too weak to stand without help. This was when true fear set in. Not the worry she had felt on the first day or even the serious concern of the second day. This was deep, primal terror. Her body was giving up, and she could feel it happening. She crawled into the shade under her car, each movement sending waves of dizziness through her head. The ground was hot even in the shade, but she no longer had the strength to care. She lay on her side, trying to breathe slowly and save what little energy she had left. The desert around her seemed to pulse and shimmer with heat waves. Sometimes, the shimmering got so intense that Lisa couldn't tell what was real and what was just distortion from the heat. She saw what looked like a road in the distance and spent several minutes trying to figure out if it was actually there or just another mirage. Her thinking became foggy and confused. She found herself having conversations with people who weren't there. She talked to her sister, telling her about the beautiful desert sunrise. She talked to her ex-husband, forgiving him for things that had seemed so important just a few days ago. She even talked to her students, explaining why she wouldn't be back for the new school year. Part of her mind knew these conversations weren't real, but they felt comforting. The loneliness had been almost as hard to bear as the thirst. Having imaginary company was better than the crushing silence of being completely alone. As the day heated up, Lisa's body temperature began to rise dangerously. Without water to produce sweat, her natural cooling system had completely broken down. Her skin felt burning hot to the touch, but she was shivering at the same time. She knew this was bad, but she couldn't remember exactly why. She tried to stay as still as possible to avoid generating more body heat, but even breathing seemed to make her hotter. The metal of her car was too hot to touch, so she couldn't even use it for support when she needed to move. Around noon, when the sun was directly overhead, Lisa started seeing things that definitely weren't there. She saw a gas station in the distance with people walking around it. She saw a helicopter landing nearby with paramedics running toward her with bottles of cold water. She saw her sister driving up in her blue SUV calling her name. Each vision was so real that Lisa tried to respond to it. She tried to wave at the helicopter, tried to call out to her sister. But when she blinked or turned her head, the visions disappeared, leaving only empty desert. The worst part was that the visions usually involved water. She saw lakes and rivers and swimming pools. She saw herself drinking glass after glass of ice-cold water. These dreams were so vivid she could almost taste the water, which made waking up to reality even more cruel. By afternoon, Lisa was barely conscious. She drifted in and out of awareness like someone with a high fever. Sometimes she knew where she was and what was happening. Other times she thought she was at home in her comfortable bed, or back in college, or visiting her grandmother's house as a child. During her clearer moments, Lisa tried to think logically about her situation. She had been missing for 3 days now. Surely someone was looking for her by now. Her sister would start worrying when she didn't answer her phone. The school might wonder why she hadn't confirmed her return date. But even if people were looking for her, how would they find her? She had told no one exactly where she was going. She was miles from any main road, in an area that probably didn't get searched regularly. Her car was small and the same color as the desert dirt. From above, it might be almost invisible. These logical thoughts were interrupted by more hallucinations. Lisa saw search planes flying overhead, but when she tried to signal them with her mirror, her hands shook too badly to aim it properly. She saw rescue teams walking nearby, but when she tried to call out, only a weak croak came from her throat. As evening approached, Lisa realized she might not survive another night. Her body was shutting down system by system. Her heart was beating irregularly, sometimes racing, sometimes seeming to skip beats entirely. Her breathing was shallow and difficult. Her vision kept going in and out of focus. She thought about writing a letter to her family, but she couldn't hold a pen steady enough to write. Instead, she just tried to send mental messages to the people she loved, telling them she was sorry for not being a better sister, daughter, and friend. The sunset that night was the most beautiful she had ever seen. The sky exploded in colors: deep red, brilliant orange, soft purple, and bright yellow. It was like nature was putting on a final show just for her. Lisa watched it with wonder, thinking that if this was her last sunset, at least it was a spectacular one. As darkness fell, the familiar cold returned, but Lisa barely felt it. Her body no longer had the energy to shiver. She just lay still under her car, watching the stars appear one by one in the clear desert sky. The stars were brighter and more numerous than she had ever seen from the city. Lisa thought about how small she was compared to the vastness of the desert and the universe beyond it. Somehow this thought wasn't frightening. It was almost peaceful. She had spent so much of her life worried about small things. But out here, under these ancient stars, those worries seemed pointless. She dozed off and on through the night, her sleep filled with dreams of water and rescue. But each time she woke up, she was still alone in the desert, still dying slowly under the indifferent stars. By the time dawn approached on her fourth day, Lisa was barely holding on to consciousness. Her body had used up almost all its reserves. She was entering the final stages of severe dehydration, where organs begin to fail and the body starts to shut down. But somewhere in the growing light of dawn, something was different. There was a sound in the distance that didn't belong to the desert's natural symphony. It was faint, but it was definitely man-made. Lisa tried to focus her failing senses on the sound, wondering if it was real or just another cruel hallucination. On the fourth day, Lisa's mind began playing the cruelest tricks of all. The line between reality and hallucination had become so blurred that she couldn't tell what was real anymore. Her brain, starved of water and oxygen, was creating elaborate fantasies that seemed more vivid than anything she had ever experienced. She woke up convinced that she was in a hospital bed with IV fluids dripping into her arm. She could feel the cool liquid entering her bloodstream, relieving the desperate thirst that had consumed her. A kind nurse was telling her she was going to be fine, that her ordeal was over. But when she tried to thank the nurse, she found herself talking to empty air under her car, and the feeling of relief crashed down around her like a collapsing building. The hallucinations came in waves throughout the morning. Lisa saw her car's air conditioning working perfectly, filling the interior with blessed cool air. She climbed inside and sat there for 20 minutes, feeling comfortable and refreshed, before realizing that the car was still broken down and the air inside was actually scalding hot. Around 10 a.m., she had the most convincing vision yet. A park ranger appeared, walking toward her car with a large jug of water and a first aid kit. He was wearing the standard uniform, brown shirt, hat, and badge, and looked completely official. He spoke to her in a calm, professional voice, explaining that search teams had been looking for her, and that everything would be okay now. Lisa tried to stand up to greet him, managing to get to her feet despite her weakness. She stumbled toward where she saw the ranger, reaching out to touch him to prove to herself that he was real. But her hands grasped nothing but hot air, and she fell face first into the sand. The fall knocked what little breath she had out of her lungs. She lay there gasping, sand in her mouth and eyes, while the reality hit her again. There was no ranger, no rescue, no water, just her, alone and dying in the vast desert. This was when desperation drove her to make a dangerous decision. In her confused state, Lisa became convinced that she could see a town in the distance. It looked like a small desert community with white buildings, palm trees, and people walking around. She could even see what looked like a swimming pool with bright blue water. Her rational mind tried to tell her it was just another mirage, but the vision was so detailed and convincing that she couldn't ignore it. Maybe this time it was real. Maybe rescue was just a short walk away. She had to try. Lisa crawled out from under her car and started walking toward the vision. Each step was agony. Her legs felt like they were made of rubber, and she had to stop every few feet to rest. The ground seemed to move under her feet like she was on a boat in rough seas. The sun beat down on her mercilessly as she stumbled across the desert floor. She had no hat, no sunscreen, and no protection from the UV rays that were literally cooking her skin. But the vision of the town kept pulling her forward like a magnet. After walking for what felt like hours, Lisa realized the town wasn't getting any closer. In fact, it seemed to be moving away from her, always staying just out of reach. She stopped and looked back toward her car, but it was nowhere to be seen. The desert all looked the same in every direction, rolling hills covered with cacti and scrub brush. Panic hit her like a physical blow. She had left her only shelter, her only hope of being found, to chase a hallucination. Now she was completely lost, with no landmarks to guide her back. She spun around in circles, trying to remember which direction she had come from, but everything looked identical. Lisa fell to her knees in the sand and started to cry, but no tears came. Her body didn't have any moisture left to spare for crying. She made dry sobbing sounds while her body shook with grief and terror. She had made a terrible mistake, and it was going to cost her any chance of survival. But then, like a miracle, she spotted something red in the distance. Her car. Somehow, despite her confusion, she could see it sitting in a small valley about half a mile away. Relief flooded through her as she realized she wasn't as lost as she had thought. The walk back to her car was the longest journey of her life. She had to crawl part of the way, dragging herself across the hot sand when her legs gave out completely. The metal of her car was so hot when she finally reached it that it burned her hands when she tried to use it for support. Lisa collapsed in the shade under her vehicle, completely exhausted by her foolish journey. She had wasted precious energy and made her situation even more desperate. But worse than the physical cost was the psychological damage. She now knew that her mind couldn't be trusted. The hallucinations were getting stronger and more convincing, and she might not be able to resist them next time. As the afternoon heat reached its peak, the visions became even more elaborate. Lisa saw news helicopters circling overhead with reporters filming her rescue for the evening news. She saw her family gathered around her car, crying with relief that she had been found. She saw paramedics hooking her up to an IV and loading her into an ambulance. But the cruelest hallucination of all was water. She saw bottles of it everywhere, scattered around her car, hanging from cacti like fruit, bubbling up from springs in the ground. The visions were so real she could hear the water gurgling and see the light reflecting off its surface. In her delirium, Lisa grabbed at these phantom water bottles, her hands closing on empty air again and again. She got on her hands and knees and tried to drink from a spring that existed only in her oxygen-starved brain. She even tried to catch rain that wasn't falling from a cloudless sky. During brief moments of clarity, Lisa understood what was happening to her. Her brain was shutting down from dehydration, creating these visions as a kind of last desperate attempt to motivate her body to find water. But understanding the hallucinations didn't make them less convincing or less torturous. She began talking to the people in her visions, carrying on complete conversations with family members and rescue workers who weren't there. To anyone watching, she would have looked completely insane, babbling to herself in the empty desert. But to Lisa, these conversations felt completely real and were her only comfort in her final hours. As evening approached, Lisa's condition deteriorated rapidly. Her body temperature was dangerously high and her heart was beating irregularly. Her breathing was shallow and labored. She was entering the final stages of heat stroke, where the body's vital systems begin to fail. But even as her body was dying, her mind continued to create elaborate fantasies. She had dinner with her family at her favorite restaurant, everyone laughing and talking as if nothing had happened. She went swimming in a cool lake, feeling the wonderful sensation of being completely surrounded by water. She took long, satisfying drinks from a garden hose, feeling the water run down her chin and soak her shirt. These visions were becoming more real to her than the actual desert around her. Sometimes she would spend hours in these imaginary worlds before something, a sound, a movement, a change in the light, would snap her back to the harsh reality of her situation. As night fell, Lisa lay under her car, drifting between hallucinations and unconsciousness. She was no longer aware of the cold or the discomfort of lying on the hard ground. Her body had moved beyond pain into a kind of numb shutdown mode. In her dreams that night, Lisa was rescued over and over again. Different people found her: police officers, firefighters, park rangers, even random strangers who happened to be driving by. Each rescue felt completely real until she woke up alone again under the stars. But somewhere in the real world, beyond Lisa's failing consciousness, something was actually happening. The sound she had heard at dawn wasn't a hallucination. Someone was out there, getting closer to her location with each passing hour. Her desperate situation was about to change, though she was now too far gone to realize it. As dawn broke on what might have been her final day, Lisa lay still and barely breathing, caught between life and death, between reality and dreams, waiting for a miracle she no longer believed could come. Carlos Rivera had been working on the Double R Ranch for over 20 years, and he knew every square mile of its vast territory like the back of his weathered hands. At 45 years old, he was the kind of man the desert had shaped. Lean, tough, and supremely practical. His face was deeply tanned from decades under the Arizona sun, and his eyes held the quiet confidence of someone who had survived in harsh places most people couldn't imagine living in. This particular morning, Carlos was riding his horse Thunder across the most remote section of the ranch. It was a routine check that he did every 2 weeks, making sure the water tanks were full and the fence lines were intact. The ranch covered nearly 60,000 acres, and this section was so far from civilization that even experienced hikers rarely ventured here. Thunder was a sturdy quarter horse, 15 years old and as familiar with the desert terrain as Carlos himself. The horse had an uncanny ability to find the safest path across rocky ground, and could sense danger long before his human rider noticed anything wrong. This morning, Thunder seemed restless, occasionally stopping to sniff the air and look toward the eastern hills. "What's got you spooked, boy?" Carlos asked, patting the horse's neck. Thunder was usually calm and steady, but today he kept turning his head toward an area they didn't normally visit. Carlos checked his watch. It was just after 8 a.m., and he had planned to check 3 water tanks before the day got too hot. But Thunder's behavior was unusual enough to catch his attention. In 20 years of partnership, Carlos had learned to trust his horse's instincts. Animals often sensed things that humans missed. He decided to take a detour toward the eastern section, following an old cattle trail that wound between the hills. This area was particularly desolate, with no roads or structures for miles around. It was the kind of place where city people could get into serious trouble if they took a wrong turn. As they rode up a small ridge, something caught Carlos's eye, a flash of red that didn't belong in the natural desert landscape. He stopped Thunder and pulled out his binoculars, focusing on the distant object. It was definitely man-made, and it looked like a vehicle. "Well, I'll be damned," Carlos muttered. In all his years working this section of the ranch, he had never seen a car out here. There were no roads that could handle regular vehicles, and certainly no reason for anyone to be this far from civilization. He urged Thunder forward, picking his way carefully across the rocky terrain toward the mysterious vehicle. As they got closer, Carlos could see it was a small red sedan, clearly not built for desert travel. It was sitting in a sandy wash, obviously stuck. What worried Carlos most was the complete silence around the car. No sound of an engine running, no movement, no signs of life. If someone had gotten stuck out here several days ago, they could be in serious trouble by now. Thunder sensed his rider's urgency and picked up the pace, carefully navigating the loose rocks and cactus-filled slopes. Carlos's mind was racing through the possibilities. Best-case scenario, the car was abandoned and whoever had been driving it had already been rescued. Worst case, someone was still here, possibly injured or worse. As they reached the valley floor where the car sat, Carlos could see that the vehicle had been there for several days. There were tire tracks showing multiple attempts to get unstuck, and personal items were scattered around. A purse, some clothes, empty water bottles. This was definitely not good. Carlos dismounted and approached the car cautiously. The doors were open, which suggested someone had been trying to create airflow and shade. He could see footprints in the sand around the vehicle, and some led away from the car before circling back. Someone had tried walking for help but had returned. "Hello?" Carlos called out, his voice echoing slightly off the surrounding hills. "Anyone here?" "This is ranch security." There was no response, but as he walked around to the shaded side of the vehicle, Carlos saw something that made his heart skip a beat. There was someone there, a woman, lying motionless in the small patch of shade under the car. Carlos had seen enough emergency situations to know that this was bad. The woman was unconscious, her skin was gray and dry, and she wasn't moving at all. He knelt down carefully and checked for a pulse, pressing his fingers against her neck. There was a heartbeat, but it was weak and irregular. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Carlos said, gently shaking her shoulder. The woman's eyelids fluttered and she made a small sound, but she didn't wake up. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, and her skin felt hot and papery to the touch. These were all classic signs of severe dehydration and heat stroke. Carlos immediately pulled his water bottle from his belt and unscrewed the cap. He knew that giving water to someone in this condition had to be done carefully. Too much too fast could actually make things worse. He lifted the woman's head slightly and dripped a few drops of water onto her lips. The woman's tongue moved slightly, trying to lick the moisture, which was a good sign. It meant her body was still trying to respond to water. Carlos continued giving her tiny amounts, just a few drops at a time. While he assessed her condition, he pulled out his radio, a heavy-duty unit that could reach the ranch headquarters even from this remote location. "Base, this is Carlos. I've got an emergency situation at grid reference Echo 7. I need medical assistance and helicopter transport immediately. I found a stranded motorist in severe condition." The radio crackled to life. "Copy that, Carlos." "What's the situation?" "Adult female appears to have been stranded for several days. Signs of severe dehydration and heat stroke. She's unconscious but breathing. I'm administering small amounts of water now." "Understood. We're contacting emergency services and dispatch helicopter. ETA approximately 45 minutes. Continue basic first aid and keep her stable." Carlos knew that 45 minutes could be the difference between life and death in this situation. He had basic first aid training. But this woman needed professional medical care as soon as possible. He would have to do everything he could to keep her alive until help arrived. He used his hat to create more shade over the woman's face and upper body. Then he took his spare shirt from his saddlebags and soaked it with water from his canteen, using it to cool her forehead and neck. Her body temperature was dangerously high, and he needed to bring it down gradually. The woman stirred slightly and her eyes opened just a crack. They were bloodshot and unfocused, but she was trying to look at him. "It's okay," Carlos said softly. "I'm here to help. You're going to be all right. I've called for medical assistance." The woman tried to speak, but only a weak whisper came out. Carlos leaned closer to hear her. "Going to die," she whispered, the words barely audible. Carlos looked directly into her eyes, his voice firm and reassuring. "Not while I'm here," he said. "You're not going to die. Help is coming, and we're going to get you through this." Something in his tone seemed to reach her, because the woman's eyes focused on him for a moment, and he saw a flicker of hope there. Carlos continued talking to her in a calm, steady voice, explaining what he was doing as he worked to stabilize her condition. He knew that keeping her conscious and engaged was important, so he told her about the ranch, about his horse Thunder, about the beautiful sunrise he had seen that morning. Anything to keep her mind active while they waited for professional help. In the distance, Carlos could hear the sound he had been waiting for, the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors cutting through the desert air. Help was coming, and if they were lucky, they had found this woman just in time. When Lisa's eyes fluttered open and she saw Carlos kneeling beside her, she thought she was hallucinating again. After days of her mind creating rescue scenarios that turned out to be cruel fantasies, she couldn't trust what she was seeing. This man looked too real, too detailed to be another mirage. But then she felt something wet and cool on her lips. Actual water, not the imaginary water she had been dreaming about. The sensation was so shocking and wonderful that it cut through her confusion like a knife. This wasn't a hallucination. Someone had actually found her. "Am I dreaming?" she whispered, her voice so hoarse it was barely audible. "No, ma'am, you're not dreaming," Carlos said gently. "My name is Carlos Rivera. I work for the ranch that owns this land. You're safe now." Lisa tried to focus on his face, but her vision kept going in and out. She could see that he was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. He was wearing a cowboy hat and work clothes, and there was something calm and competent about the way he moved that made her feel safe for the first time in days. "I'm going to die," Lisa whispered, the words coming from the deepest part of her despair. After 4 days of deteriorating condition, she had accepted that she wouldn't survive. Her body was shutting down, and she could feel life slipping away from her like sand through her fingers. Carlos looked directly into her eyes, and his voice was firm and unwavering when he spoke. "Not while I'm here," he said. "You're not going to die. I've got water, I've got medical supplies, and help is on the way. We're going to get you through this." Something about the absolute certainty in his voice reached Lisa even through her delirium. This wasn't false hope or empty reassurance. This was a man who had dealt with emergencies before and knew what he was talking about. For the first time in days, Lisa felt a tiny spark of hope kindle in her chest. Carlos continued giving her small sips of water, explaining each step as he worked. "I'm going to give you just a little bit at a time," he said. "Your body needs to readjust gradually. Too much water too fast can actually make you sicker right now." He used his radio to give regular updates to the ranch headquarters and the incoming medical team. "Patient is conscious but severely dehydrated. Skin is hot and dry, pulse is weak and rapid. I'm providing small amounts of water and cooling measures. Need medical team to be prepared for heat stroke protocol. While they waited for the helicopter, Carlos worked methodically to stabilize Lisa's condition. He moved his horse to create more shade, then used his spare clothes to make a more comfortable surface for her to lie on. He soaked his bandana in water and used it to cool her forehead, neck, and wrists, places where blood vessels were close to the skin and cooling would be most effective. "What's your name?" Carlos asked, continuing to talk to keep her conscious and engaged. "Lisa," she managed to whisper. "Lisa Chen. That's a pretty name. Where are you from, Lisa?" "Phoenix," she said, and then added with bitter irony, "I thought I knew about desert heat." Carlos smiled slightly. "City heat is different from out here. No shade, no water, no way to escape it. But you did the right thing staying with your car. That's probably what saved your life." Lisa tried to remember the details of how she had gotten here, but her memory was fuzzy. The last few days felt like a nightmare that was already starting to fade. "How long?" she asked. "Based on the condition of your car and the tracks around it, I'd say you've been here at least 3, maybe 4 days. Carlos said. "That's a long time without water in this heat. You're tougher than you know." The sound of the helicopter grew louder and Carlos stood up to wave them in. "That's our ride," he told Lisa. "Medical team will be here in just a minute." Lisa watched as a medical helicopter appeared over the ridge and began circling to find a safe landing spot. The sound of the rotors was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard, not because it meant rescue, but because it confirmed that this was really happening. She wasn't hallucinating. Help had actually come. The helicopter landed about 50 yards away, kicking up a cloud of dust and sand. Carlos shielded Lisa with his body to protect her from the debris, then waved the medical team over to their location. 2 paramedics came running over with their equipment. Carlos quickly briefed them on Lisa's condition and what treatment he had already provided. The paramedics worked with practiced efficiency, checking her vital signs and setting up an IV line to begin fluid replacement. "You did good work," one of the paramedics told Carlos. The small amounts of water and the cooling measures probably prevented her from going into shock. Another few hours and we might have been too late. They loaded Lisa onto a stretcher and began moving her toward the helicopter. Carlos walked alongside, still talking to her, helping keep her calm during the transition. "Am I going to be okay?" Lisa asked one of the paramedics. "You're going to be fine," the paramedic assured her. "We're taking you to the trauma center in Phoenix. They'll have you fixed up in no time." As they reached the helicopter, Lisa grabbed Carlos's hand with what little strength she had. "Thank you," she said, tears finally coming to her eyes now that her body had enough moisture to produce them. "You saved my life." Carlos squeezed her hand gently. "Just glad I found you in time," he said. "You take care of yourself, Lisa Chen." The medical team loaded her into the helicopter and Carlos stepped back as the aircraft lifted off. He watched until it disappeared over the horizon, carrying Lisa toward the medical care she desperately needed. As the sound of the helicopter faded away, Carlos was left alone in the desert with thunder in Lisa's abandoned car. He took a moment to look around at the harsh but beautiful landscape that had nearly claimed a life today. Out here, nature didn't care about human plans or problems. It was indifferent to suffering and unforgiving of mistakes. But today, human compassion and preparation had won out over the desert's indifference. Carlos had been in the right place at the right time, with the right skills and equipment to make a difference. It felt good to know that his years of experience and training had helped save someone's life. He mounted Thunder and began the ride back to the ranch headquarters, where he would need to file reports and coordinate with authorities about Lisa's car. But as he rode, Carlos found himself thinking about the moment when Lisa had said she was going to die, and his instinctive response, "Not while I'm here." Those words had come from somewhere deep inside him, from a place that refused to accept defeat when a human life was at stake. It was the same instinct that made him check water tanks religiously, maintain his radio equipment carefully, and always carry more supplies than he thought he would need. In the harsh world of the desert, that kind of preparation and determination could mean the difference between life and death. Today it had meant everything to Lisa Chen, a woman he had never met before and might never see again, but whose life he had helped save with 4 simple words. "Not while I'm here." The helicopter ride to Phoenix was a blur of medical activity and overwhelming relief for Lisa. She drifted in and out of consciousness as the paramedics worked over her, inserting IV lines and monitoring her vital signs. Through the aircraft's windows, she could see the desert landscape rushing by below. The same terrain that had nearly killed her now looked almost peaceful from the safety of the helicopter. One of the paramedics, a woman named Janet, kept talking to her throughout the flight. "We're giving you fluids to rehydrate your body," she explained. "Your temperature is coming down, which is good. Heart rate is stabilizing. You're doing great." Lisa wanted to ask questions to understand what was happening to her body, but speaking required too much energy. Instead, she focused on the feeling of cool IV fluid entering her bloodstream. It was the most wonderful sensation she had ever experienced, better than any meal, any drink, any comfort she had ever known. "How long to the hospital?" she heard someone ask. 15 minutes, came the reply. "We're taking her straight to Mercy General's Trauma Center. They're ready for us." Carlos had insisted on riding in the helicopter with Lisa, despite the cramped conditions. He sat quietly in the corner, his presence somehow reassuring even though she barely knew him. Every few minutes he would catch her eye and nod encouragingly, as if to remind her that she was safe now. "The Cowboy's coming with us?" one of the paramedics had asked when they were loading her. "He knows the area better than anyone," the flight medic had replied. "If there are questions about where she was found or how long she was there, he'll have the answers. Plus, she seems calmer when he's around." Lisa could see the Phoenix skyline growing larger through the helicopter window. The city she had been so eager to escape from just a few days ago now looked like the most beautiful sight in the world. Those tall buildings meant air conditioning, hospitals, water fountains, and all the comforts of civilization she had taken for granted. The helicopter touched down on the hospital's helipad with a gentle bump. Within seconds, a team of doctors and nurses surrounded the aircraft, ready to take over Lisa's care. As they transferred her to a hospital gurney, Lisa felt a moment of panic at being separated from Carlos. "Will you stay?" she asked him as the medical team began wheeling her toward the hospital entrance. "I'll stay until your family gets here," Carlos promised, walking alongside the gurney. "I already called the number we found in your purse. Your sister is driving up from Tucson. She'll be here in a couple of hours." Inside the trauma center, the activity became even more intense. Doctors examined Lisa thoroughly, ordering blood tests, x-rays, and other procedures to assess the damage from her ordeal. A young doctor named Dr. Patel took charge of her case, explaining each step of the treatment plan. "You're suffering from severe dehydration and heat exhaustion," Dr. Patel explained. "Your body temperature reached dangerous levels, and several of your organ systems are stressed. But the good news is that we caught it in time. With proper treatment, you should make a full recovery." They moved Lisa to an intensive care unit where they could monitor her closely. The cool, quiet room was such a contrast to the blazing desert heat that Lisa almost couldn't believe it was real. A steady drip of IV fluids flowed into her arm, and she could feel her body slowly beginning to heal. Carlos stayed true to his word, waiting in the hospital lobby until Lisa's family arrived. Her sister Jenny drove up from Tucson in record time, bringing Lisa's parents with her. When they rushed into the ICU, Lisa broke down crying at the sight of their worried faces. "We were so scared," Jenny sobbed, holding Lisa's hand. "When you didn't answer your phone for 2 days, we called the police. They were organizing search teams, but they didn't know where to look." "I'm sorry," Lisa whispered. "I should have told someone exactly where I was going." Her parents stood on either side of the bed, just grateful that their daughter was alive. Her father, usually a man of few words, kept repeating, "We almost lost you. We almost lost you." Dr. Patel came in to update the family on Lisa's condition. "She's responding well to treatment," he said. "Her body temperature is back to normal, and her vital signs are stabilizing. We'll keep her here for observation for a few days, but I expect her to make a complete recovery." "How bad was it?" Jenny asked. "I mean, how close did she come to—" Dr. Patel was quiet for a moment. "Let's just say that if she hadn't been found when she was, we might be having a very different conversation. Another 6 to 8 hours, and organ failure would have begun. The man who found her literally saved her life." Lisa asked about Carlos and learned that he was still in the waiting room. Despite her family's protest that she needed to rest, she insisted on seeing him before he left. They brought Carlos to her room where he stood awkwardly, his cowboy hat in his hands. "I wanted to thank you properly," Lisa said. "The doctors say you saved my life." Carlos shrugged modestly. Just doing what anyone would do. Glad you're going to be okay. No, Lisa said firmly. Not anyone would do what you did. You knew exactly how to help me. You stayed calm and you refused to give up on me. When I said I was going to die, you looked me in the eye and said, "Not while I'm here." Those words gave me hope when I had none left. Lisa's family surrounded Carlos, shaking his hand and thanking him repeatedly. Her father, a retired businessman, tried to offer him money as a reward, but Carlos politely declined. "Seeing her alive and well is reward enough," he said simply. Before Carlos left, he gave Lisa his contact information. "If you ever want to see where this all happened, you're welcome to visit the ranch," he said. "Though maybe next time come in a proper vehicle with plenty of water and a satellite phone." Lisa laughed, her first real laugh in days. "I think I'll stick to the city for a while," she said. "But I would like to see you again. Maybe I can buy you dinner sometime as a small way to say thank you." Carlos smiled. "I'd like that," he said. "You take care of yourself, Lisa Chen. And remember, you're tougher than you know." After Carlos left, Lisa lay in her hospital bed, surrounded by her family and the steady beep of medical monitors. The contrast between this safe, cool environment and the hellish heat of the desert seemed impossible. Just that morning, she had been dying alone under a broken-down car. Now she was in a comfortable bed with professional medical care and people who loved her nearby. The experience had changed something fundamental inside her. The things that had seemed so important before, her divorce, her job stress, her need to prove her independence, now seemed trivial compared to the simple miracle of being alive. She had learned the hard way that life could end quickly and randomly, and that every day was a gift not to be wasted. As she drifted off to sleep, Lisa thought about Carlos's words, "Not while I'm here." She decided that would be her new motto for life. Whenever someone needed help, whenever she had the chance to make a difference, she would remember those words. She had been given a second chance at life, and she was determined not to waste it. 6 months after her rescue, Lisa stood in front of her bathroom mirror and barely recognized the person looking back at her. The physical scars from her desert ordeal had mostly healed. The sun damage to her skin had faded, and she had regained the weight she had lost. But the real changes went much deeper than anything visible on the surface. The woman in the mirror had different eyes now. They held a depth and awareness that hadn't been there before. She had looked death in the face and survived, and that experience had stripped away all the trivial concerns that used to consume her daily thoughts. The divorce that had sent her fleeing into the desert in the first place now seemed like a minor setback rather than a life-ending catastrophe. Lisa had returned to her job teaching high school English, but she approached it with renewed passion. Her students noticed the change immediately. She was more patient, more understanding, and had a way of putting problems into perspective that resonated with teenagers facing their own dramas and crises. "Life is precious and unpredictable," she would tell her students when they were stressed about grades or social problems. "The things that seem overwhelming today might not matter at all a year from now. Focus on what really counts, the people you love, the kindness you can show others, and making each day meaningful." Her colleagues weren't sure what had happened to Lisa during her vacation, but they could see she was different. She volunteered for extra duties, stayed after school to help struggling students, and had become one of the most popular teachers in the school. But the most significant change in Lisa's life was her new involvement with desert rescue organizations. 2 months after her recovery, she had contacted the Maricopa County Search and Rescue Team and volunteered her services. They were initially skeptical. Most volunteers were experienced hikers or climbers, not suburban teachers who had gotten themselves into trouble. But Lisa's unique perspective as someone who had actually been lost and dying in the desert proved invaluable. She could speak to other rescue victims in a way that professional rescuers, no matter how skilled, simply couldn't. She understood the fear, the hallucinations, the desperation, and the way hope could slip away minute by minute in that harsh environment. When someone has been lost in the desert for days, they often don't trust their own perceptions anymore, Lisa would explain to new rescue volunteers. They've been hallucinating, seeing mirages, imagining rescue scenarios. When real help finally arrives, they might not believe it's actually happening. You have to be patient and reassuring, and understand that their minds may not be working normally. Lisa also became a passionate advocate for desert safety education. She gave presentations at hiking clubs, schools, and community centers about the importance of proper preparation when venturing into remote areas. Her story was powerful because it was real. She wasn't just reciting safety tips from a manual, but sharing hard-earned wisdom from someone who had paid the price for being unprepared. "I thought I was being adventurous and independent," she would tell her audiences. "In reality, I was being foolish and reckless. I went into one of the most dangerous environments on Earth with no emergency supplies, no communication device, and no one knowing exactly where I was. I'm only alive today because of pure luck and the heroism of a stranger." Her presentations always ended with practical advice. Always tell someone your exact route and expected return time. Carry more water than you think you need. Bring emergency signaling devices. Stay with your vehicle if you break down. And never underestimate the desert's ability to kill the unprepared. Lisa's relationship with her family had also transformed. The experience of almost losing her had brought them closer together than they had been in years. Her parents, who had always been somewhat distant, now called her every few days just to hear her voice. Her sister Jenny had become not just family but a true friend, and they spent much more time together than they ever had before. "I keep thinking about how we almost lost you," Jenny confided during one of their regular lunch dates. "It made me realize how much I took our relationship for granted. We could have lost all these conversations we're having now, all these memories we're making. It's made me more intentional about spending time with the people I love." But perhaps the most important relationship in Lisa's new life was her friendship with Carlos Rivera. True to her promise, she had driven out to the Double R Ranch a month after her recovery to properly thank him and to see the place where her life had changed forever. The ranch was everything she had expected and more. Vast, rugged, and beautiful in the way that only the desert could be. Carlos had given her a tour, showing her the water tanks he maintained, the fence lines he monitored, and the exact spot where he had found her car. Standing there in the daylight, with plenty of water and proper protection from the sun, Lisa could hardly believe she had survived 4 days in this place. The landscape that had nearly killed her now looked almost peaceful, but she could feel its underlying power and indifference. "It doesn't look like much," Carlos had said, "but out here, a small mistake can turn into a big problem real quick. You're lucky you made as many right decisions as you did, staying with your car, trying to create shade, not wandering too far from your vehicle. Those choices probably kept you alive long enough for me to find you." Lisa and Carlos had stayed in touch, meeting for dinner every few months when she drove out to Phoenix. Their friendship was unique, bonded by an experience that few people could understand. Carlos was humble about his role in her rescue, but Lisa never let him forget that he was the reason she was still alive. "You know what I remember most about that day?" Lisa asked him during one of their dinners. "It wasn't the heat or the thirst or even the hallucinations. It was the moment when you looked me in the eye and said, 'Not while I'm here.' I had given up hope, but something in your voice made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I could survive." Carlos smiled in his quiet way. "Sometimes people just need to know that someone else hasn't given up on them," he said. "That's all I did. I refused to give up." But Lisa knew it was more than that. Carlos had done everything right, from his careful approach to finding her to his methodical first aid, to his calm communication with the rescue team. His years of experience and preparation had come together at exactly the right moment to save a stranger's life. As the 1-year anniversary of her rescue approached, Lisa found herself reflecting on how completely her life had changed. The woman who had driven into the desert a year ago had been running away from problems, feeling sorry for herself, and focused on what was wrong with her life. The woman she was now spent her time helping others, appreciating what she had and making each day count. She had started dating again, something she had thought she would never do after her divorce. But her experience in the desert had taught her that life was too short and too precious to waste on fear or past hurts. She was learning to trust again, to be vulnerable again, and to believe that happiness was possible even after heartbreak. Her students often asked her if she regretted taking that fateful trip into the desert. Lisa always gave them the same answer. "I regret being so unprepared and putting myself in unnecessary danger. I regret the pain I caused my family when I went missing. But I don't regret the experience itself, because it taught me what really matters in life and showed me that I'm stronger than I ever knew." On the exact anniversary of her rescue, Lisa drove back to the Double R Ranch to meet Carlos at the spot where he had found her. They stood together in the desert, looking out at the vast landscape that had nearly claimed her life but had ultimately given her a new one. "Thank you," she said simply, as she had said so many times before. "Thank you," Carlos replied. "Meeting you, seeing how you've turned this experience into something positive, it's reminded me why I love this work. We never know when our preparation and skills might make the difference between life and death for someone." As they stood in the desert, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Lisa thought about the strange and wonderful ways that life could change in an instant. A wrong turn had led her to the edge of death, but it had also led her to a deeper understanding of what it meant to be truly alive. The desert around them was still harsh and unforgiving, still capable of claiming the lives of the unprepared, but it was also beautiful in its own stark way, and Lisa had learned to respect both its dangers and its fierce, austere beauty. She would never again underestimate the power of nature or take for granted the simple miracle of each day of life she had been given. The cowboy who had refused to let her die had given her more than just her life back, and he had shown her how to live it with purpose, gratitude, and hope, and that she knew was a gift that would last forever.